Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave, and this is my podcast. In this season, we meet contributors to a new book, Deathworlds to Lifeworlds, Collaboration with Strangers for Personal, Social, and Ecological Transformation, published by Debra of Berlin. Today, we meet Dr. Debra Opland. Dr. Debbie is a proponent of peace education, which applies theories of Indigenous wisdom to a peace curriculum. The ultimate goal is to grow a rehumanized community of hope and action. She earned her doctorate at Fielding Graduate University by applying transformative phenomenology in her research. She continues her postdoctoral work at Lakota Reservation communities in Western South Dakota. Please welcome Dr. Debra Opland. Okay. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Debbie.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And let's jump into the chapter that you contributed to this book. You titled the chapter, The Indigenous Worldview and the Vision of a Peace Educator. You speak of the Indigenous worldview as a vision of peace, and I want to begin with the big picture. What is this way of belonging to humanity? And did transformative phenomenology play a role in this?
Transformative phenomenology played a huge role in getting all of my ideas expressed. I have been on a journey for nearly 25 years now as a teacher among Indigenous communities on and off the reservations of Western South Dakota. But before that, as a young woman growing up in South Dakota, I grew up within what I call a culture of peace. It was totally idyllic post-World War II. South Dakota, a rural atmosphere surrounded by family, surrounded by love. And until the Vietnam era, and the Vietnam era was a shock to my entire way of life. My entire upbringing presented a considerable amount of conflict within my own self. So it has been a continuing journey. Early on, I was raised by what I call Old Testament Christians because they believed in the Beatitudes, they lived it. The golden rule that's in most of our religion systems. They act accordingly. So I was raised in a very Christian environment. The church was almost our second home. But I was raised in a complete value system and unconditional love. And ever since raised in that atmosphere, I had developed what Huxley calls the perceptual innocence of childhood. I was able to keep it until the world came upon me and I left for college. And in college, I became a Vietnam War protester. Much of what was going on in my country was horrifying. Babies were burning in churches in Birmingham. Fellow students were getting killed at Kent State. And this was quite a shock to the being of this pretty innocent young woman. And from then on, I started asking the questions. Albert Einstein is a peace educator or a peace activist. From his days when first objecting to his work being used in the process of making an atomic bomb. And he asks the question, unless we're willing to wipe out every man, woman, and child in the universe, we have to find other ways of solving our disputes. And he suggested that we achieve peace through understanding. And ever since then, I've been asking that question. And it's been a long, long journey.
Let me go back to this issue of
Sure.
peace, the culture of peace. You say that you grew up in a Christian culture of peace, and yet much of your chapter is about peace to be found in indigenous influences. How would you compare these two cultures as you experienced them?
Yes. As I continued on my journey, I became an anthropologist and started learning of Joseph Campbell and his work with mythologies all around the world. And I started developing a different worldview. I started discovering that, yes, there were other worldviews. And listening much to I guess in fear in some way of many of my relatives who felt I was abandoning the Christian ways. But what I came to find out is that much of what I had learned in my childhood is in the old Far Eastern philosophy that has been abandoned in Western cultures. So I started discovering these many different cultures and found that in these cultures that life is a journey to peace. And the ancient rite of passage in many traditions, one is required to follow a vision quest and to live at peace with each and all. It's very fundamental to the Indigenous worldview. To the oneness principle that you asked about, creating a sense of belonging. The oneness principle is found in all Indigenous world cultures. That comes from work done by McCaslin and Breslin. That it's fundamental and it's core to our being.
Well, let me ask directly then, what is the oneness principle?
Okay. In the Indigenous cultures, I'm going to quote a Native American proverb that says, "The strength of the wolf is in the pack, and the strength of the pack is in the wolf." The very Indigenous idea of the oneness principle, Indigenous cultures founded at the essence of life, that we should care for one and all, and we should try to live in balance with the universe. It's best expressed in the Lakota phrase, "Midake Oyasin." This phrase is used in prayer, it's used in greetings among Lakota cultures. It's only used in ceremony, and I've been told it should be just used in ceremony. But Mitake Oyasin means all my relatives, or we are all related. And it was one of the discoveries as I adopted an Indigenous worldview in my dissertation. It was one of the discoveries, Midaki Oyasin, we are all related on a common quest for understanding and peace. And to get back to your original question of what this had to do with transformative phenomenology, is that one of the goals of a transformative phenomenologist is oneness, is to create the idea of oneness among people.
Oh, let me go back for a moment to what you were saying about having been jolted out of that idyllic life you grew up with by the harsh realities of the 1960s war protests. I'm wondering, how can peace be achieved through understanding? You bring this up. Is it your view that peace is in fact achievable through understanding, or are parties to a conflict predisposed to, quote, win at all costs, right up to the end, even if it means their own demise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you talk to peace activists, the Dalai Lama, who is, you're always going to have conflict. You're always going to have suffering, very much in Buddhist traditions. Your goal in life, it's an ancient, what I call the ancient rite of passage, is to gain understanding, to gain self-understanding. So my answer to the question is, yes, you can. You can achieve peace through self-understanding. And that's where we have to begin first. And that's why transformative phenomenology was so meaningful, because all of us authors in this book experienced and expressed in our chapters that personal transformation we went through so that now we can create social and ecological change. And it is very much part of the ancient traditions and the ancient rite of passage that you achieve that self-understanding. Medicine Wheel Way of the Lakota people, of the Great Plains people who followed the buffalo. There's 7 council fires that make up the what they call Sioux people, but Sioux is an inappropriate Western term for it. They call themselves the Ochetis Hakoing, the 7 council fires, and they follow the Medicine Wheel Way. And in it, we are each born with a special gift of medicine to give to the world. And we can't fully realize this until we share it with others. So our commitment to life, McCaslin and Breslin say that all Indigenous cultures have that basis of oneness. They have Mitake Oyasin. It's expressed in South African and in the Zulu language as Umbutu, meaning we are all belonging to the same people. We are all one, oneness principle.
Mm-hmm.
And this gives us a sense of belonging to humanity.
When you returned to Fielding to complete your doctorate, you became more aware of the, as you put it, divided self phenomenon. So this sounds like an acute example of a death world. Would you describe the divided self experience and your response to it?
Yes. When I came back to Fielding, I had been asking this question forever. It's taken me a long time to get through Fielding. I initially started in 2002 and dropped out a couple of times because of my field work on the reservations and combining that with a personal life and a professional life here in the state of South Dakota. It's been a long and strenuous journey, but I have been led back to Fielding late this in the last year in 2018, actually. My father passed away, and it was a huge change of life. I was teaching on the reservation. My life was swirling, and I myself was truly divided. I describe it in the dissertation as that I'm East River Debra, the one that grew up in the culture of peace, that sweet little innocent girl, which I have stayed, it's there. And then I'm West River Debbie, and that's that wild woman archetype that Pincola talks about, that grew up peace activist time. You know, I'm a peace love hippie at heart, really, and living in a state of South Dakota that, well, I describe it as right to the right of righteous. It's the attitude very much here state, but I maintain a balance. When I came back in 2018 after working the reservations and seeing children there experience the same kind of schizophrenic symptoms, and that's what it's defined as. Lang describes it as schizophrenia, that we're separated from our environment, we're separated from our communities, our social world now, we're isolated and alienated. And that separation causes a huge divide inside our souls. Now, this may be small. This may be to someone like me who had the foundation to cope with the changes I needed to make personally to resolve that. And that's what the dissertation is about. And that's what transformative phenomenology did for me.
So you're saying that you're suggesting there are 2 kinds of schizophrenia, broadly speaking. One is induced by chemicals in the brain for the individual, and the other is induced by social influences.
Very much so. If you study the work of Lang, Huxley, he talks about that social, very good point, David. Thank you. That there's a physical, there's a psychological, physical, pathological reason for it, and a social. Lang talks a lot about the social influences, and that's a lot of what I deal with, because you're taken out of the context of culture and the greater conscience in our systems.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds as if you're saying that transformative phenomenology reconciles the divided self
did for me. And because I was able to work, as many of the other authors have talked about in your podcast, as a reflective practitioner. The first person that has to change, I talked about that earlier, the personal transformation has to come first. You have to gain that personal understanding, and that's ancient. When you gain that personal understanding, you gain a sense of peace, a sense of inner peace. And Gandhi writes about that. Dalai Lama writes about that. The inner peace has to happen first before we can have outer peace in the world.
Well, it also sounds like you're describing some of what Jim Marlatt and Valerie Bentz wrote in their chapter that transformative phenomenology is an antidote to Deathworlds.
Yes, yes. And I haven't mentioned some of the Deathworlds, it gets long, and but some of the my other authors, when I share part 4, I just share with other authors, Valerie Grossman, Tosa Montoya, I'm not doing her name justice, and Malgazorta. And we each wrote, all of us wrote about these death worlds that we experienced on our journeys to personal transformation, and how this affected, well, it changed us dramatically. Well, it was life-changing for me. So in exploring joining the Strangers to Collaborators project, I learned transformative phenomenology. I developed the qualities of a transformative phenomenologist. And that gave me the inlet into academia
I see.
that I needed. Does that make sense?
Sure, sure.
Because I struggled. That's why I struggled for 18 years before I came back in, really truly came back in the program and figured out what I was going to do. And there was Valerie Bentz and Jim Marlatt and you and our group. And it just, and I think the other authors say that too. I know I've talked to them too. What it's powerful. It's very powerful.
It is. And I admire you continuing your work in Western South Dakota. I'd ask if you would invite, I'd like to ask you to share some of the new directions your work is opening onto and how any of our listeners might either imitate your leadership or contribute to your work.
Yes, very much so. This is my next struggle because I have come to the conclusions working among dysfunctional systems. I work on reservations. These are the poorest counties in the entire United States. And they are also indigenous communities that are rich in the preservation of their own culture. And this is where I found the culture of peace again, is among these elders in these communities. The unchis is the word for Lakota grandmother. And if you're standing in a room full of all of them, you got to pronounce it right. I used to pronounce it as unchi, and 3 of them, unchi. I said, okay. Anyway, honored to become an unchi, because these grandmothers are the ones that are not only preserving their culture against cultural genocide, they're preserving their language, their culture, and they're holding their families together. And
so if one of your listeners here wanted to imitate your leadership, what would you recommend they do? First steps to doing something similar to what you are doing?
I would say in their own field, wherever they are, whoever you are, and it is in the scholarly effort, learn who you are. That's the first step. Make that personal transformation. And if you're in the scholarly place, if it's your fielding, you get to know our phenomenology group, and you learn the qualities of a transformative phenomenologist. Because in developing those, I learned they're storytelling. They're the old traditional, our oldest mythologies our oldest methodology is storytelling. So in my dissertation, I patterned it after the protocols of transformative phenomenology and looked at the phenomena of me becoming, in essence, a stranger to collaborator among the Lakota people. And so I used transformative phenomenology as the modern innovative way, and autoethnography. And then the third storytelling methodology was Indigenous story work. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm applying it to a curriculum. I'm investigating research grants. I'm looking for funding. I'm looking for participation. I'm building an educational consultancy company. It's called Ishimini Wakwala, which is Journey to Peace. And I'm literally databasing educational consultants. And I'm contacting the elderly. If you're not over 50, don't apply. And when do you ever hear that?
Never hear that.
I have a sister locked in a nursing home through COVID. Her mind is clear. She's also got her doctorate in education. We call ourselves a paradox because we truly are. But she is crippled totally by arthritis. She cannot move. As she calls it, they download her and unload her onto bed. And it's a miserable life. I want to start helping these people start to relate their life stories and applying their life stories to the curriculum to teach young people. That's what I'm all about. Well,
I hope that our listeners, some of them, will be inspired by what you're saying.
Yes, I don't know. I probably shouldn't just start giving out my email or anything like that, but I am creating a website.
Okay. We'll make it possible for them to find you when you're ready.
Oh, Dr. Dave, I so appreciate it. In Lakota, Palemea, and then I had an Unchi come up to me after a class one day. And she says, normally in Lakota, we say Palemea. And I mean to you, but to you, I say Wohila. And it means a very special thank you. Very special thank you. It's reserved for what you do. You're making it by giving us a voice. You're giving voices to those Indigenous people that my co-authors and I, my gosh, we need to make amends and we need to move forward and we need to heal. So when
you're on that path right now.
Yes.
Listen, Dr. Debbie, I want to thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to share your work and the book chapter with us. It's been really marvelous. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Dave. Take care. Doksha.
What is Doksha?
In most foreign Indigenous languages, they don't have a word for goodbye, because we will see you again, even if it's in the spirit world, we will always see each other again. So they don't have words for goodbye. So the word in Lakota is Doksha, or they say Dokshak.